Hi everyone, I want to thank you for joining me for another episode of Life Goes On. This is a show brought to you by Elder Circle, which is a sub-grantee of CSEP, the Senior Community Service Employment Program, dedicated to helping those 55 and older find meaningful community service training and unsubsidized employment. Today with me, I have a special guest, Lisa Peterson. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So Lisa, why are you here, I guess? Okay, so we're just going to have fun with this one today. What is it that you do specifically that you're here for?
Well, I work for the Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota, and I'm the outreach coordinator. I cover all of northeastern Minnesota, and that includes all the way up to Kikuchiching, over to Beltrami County, down to Pine County, and over to Lake and Cook County. And so the Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota services all of Minnesota and parts of North Dakota, and I'm the go-to person in the Northland. What we do is we educate, we empower, and we connect people who are affected by epilepsy. And we do that in a variety of ways. One of the things that we do is we provide avenues for people affected by epilepsy to get connected with others. So we have quarterly family fun events. We just had one recently at Simix Farm in Kelsey, Minnesota. This fall, we have one of our events lined up for the aquarium in Bentleyville on opening night. So we're very excited about that. And then this winter, after the new year, we'll be going to Hartley Nature Center, and we'll be doing animal tracks and snowshoeing. And so there are different activities throughout the year to involve people. For people who have children, we try to keep it family friendly, but it's definitely something for adults with epilepsy to get involved with as well. A lot of the adults enjoy the Huskies game that we do in June each year. We also do support groups for different types of situations where people might identify best with. Our adult support group meets monthly on the second Thursday of each month in Duluth. And we meet at St. Mary's in the conference room, the Minnesota room, which is right off across from the cafeteria. And it's really an opportunity for adults affected by epilepsy to realize they're not alone, to be able to talk about their situations in a safe atmosphere. We bring in speakers who can help with topics that might be of interest to them. Recently we had Access North and People Incorporated come in and share about their programs and services and who might benefit from what they have to offer in the community. Our women's support group meets quarterly, and soon we'll have someone coming from Yoga Alliance to share about doing yoga to reduce stress, which is great for people with epilepsy, but really great for anyone.
Really
so we
good.
try to, vary who we have come in, and there are times that we don't have speakers where it's just open forum. And it's always a comfortable setting where if you've never come before, you're welcomed in, and it's no one has to share more than they'd like to, but it's a great way to realize that you're not alone in your journey. We have a family support group that meets quarterly as well, and that one includes dinner and childcare. And we provide that because we understand that for individuals who have children, that if we don't provide that service, that sometimes they just opt not to come. And we want to make it accessible to those families as well. So not everybody who attends has a child with epilepsy. It could be an adult with epilepsy who happens to have children, and it is a good fit for them to come to that group. Or even a single adult. It's really open to anyone, but the perk is that it is family friendly, and so for anyone that is looking for that atmosphere, it's a great opportunity. We, again, meet quarterly, and so we meet the first Monday of every third month, so October, January, then we meet again in April. Our July meeting is a picnic. Okay. All the support groups have a picnic together, and so that time of year, it's a little different than our typical school year program that we, run throughout, fall and into winter. And we can, if anybody's interested in knowing more about the support groups, our website always has the updates on when the next support groups meet. And if people want to be on our mailing list, then they'll always get updates through email about anything that's new coming up. We try to make sure that people stay informed and that they know that there are ways to connect, even, if they don't want to connect now, maybe down the road they might decide it's a good time. And so as I mentioned, we do connect groups. We also do various things to build advocacy skills. We go to the Capitol each year, and so our day at the Capitol is an opportunity for individuals to talk to their lawmakers, to their state representatives about issues that are important to them. A few years back, some advocates were instrumental in changing the driving law from 6 months to 3 months seizure-free in the state of Minnesota. So there is, that sense and ability to be able to advocate and realize that, wow, I do have the ability to talk to someone about my ideas and what, how epilepsy impacts me. And it's exciting to see people get out of their comfort zone and talk. We take a bus each year from Duluth down to the Capitol, and so people who are interested.
How long of a drive is that?
It's about 2.5 hours, and it's an early morning, and so we, realize that it's not, the easiest time of day to get up and moving, but we really enjoy the group that we're able to go down with each year, and so anyone interested in those type of activities can certainly reach out to me about when those opportunities will exist again. We do things with creative arts to incorporate people who have epilepsy. They can submit their artwork. We have what we call Brainstorm Art Collection. And so we can collect art anytime throughout the year. You can view it online and see the submissions. And then those pieces of art go on display throughout the state in coffee shops, libraries, different places. We also have some little note cards that have some prints of those art pieces that have been shared. And then there's a little note on the back about the author, or the artist rather, and so it's really neat.
It makes it very personable.
Yeah, it's exciting for those people to realize that, wow, I have epilepsy, but I can do something to, show what I can do. We also collect writing throughout the year, and we have what we call an epilogues program, and so we put together a book each year of people's writing, and so anyone can put in a submission, and we have performing arts too. And last year we had a little boy from Duluth, grade school student, who came and showed how he can play his fiddle for everyone at the performing arts. And so it's very exciting. We want people across the state to get involved with programs to support them. We do information and referral. So if anyone is facing a challenge, trying to figure out where to go, how to navigate whatever system it is with healthcare or insurance or fill in the blank, whatever it is that they're facing and they're trying to figure out, where do I go? We'll help people. If we don't have the resources, the information that we'll provide will help them get to wherever they need to best be met for what their needs are. We also do a Shining Star program, which is phenomenal. We love it when people will share stories about their child who has epilepsy, so they can sign up to be a Shining Star. They'll get special invites to things that we have going on in the community for them. They get a certificate and recognition as a Shining Star. It's really great for those kids to realize that they don't have to be embarrassed that they have epilepsy and that there are lots of other Shining Stars. So that's great. We actually have a camp each year in June, and it's right across the border of Minnesota in Wisconsin, but our Epilepsy Foundation staff help put that on at this YMCA camp in Hudson. We have a lot of medical staff and nurses available, and so it's wonderful. Kids who have epilepsy maybe haven't had this type of experience in the past, and so we are really excited each year to see these children and sometimes their siblings come and experience camp for the first time. And so there are obviously varied opportunities throughout the year for people with epilepsy to feel heard, to know that they're not alone.
That's cool. I've got some questions now because you just gave out a ton of information already. And so you were mentioning the support groups, and you did mention that at least one of them's in Duluth.
Correct.
Now, you have you cover most of the north part of Minnesota, right?
Right.
Okay, so do you have support groups, or is there support groups in the more rural areas away from Duluth?
That's a great question. I have Seizure Smart communities, and my hope is that some of those communities, that some volunteers will surface that will be appropriate for delegating out some of that responsibility to help facilitate support groups. I've fortunately been able to help with seeing that happen in Bemidji. And so in Bemidji, in May, we had our first Bemidji Connect group, and it was just wonderful. Many families came together who hadn't been connected to others prior to that. Then in August, they had a picnic, and they wanted to do their own do-it-yourself fundraiser walk since they didn't want to drive to Duluth for our annual fundraising walk. And it was awesome. And I've been able to attend both of them. Eventually, they'll probably have some meetings where I'll just pass it off to some of my volunteers and they can run with it. We're meeting again on November 10th, and we meet in the Sanford Medical Center conference room. And so that's the site that we use, and we're planning to meet quarterly with their group. And this is kind of the start of what I hope will happen in other communities as well. I would love to see something like that eventually in Hibbing, Grand Rapids, Silver Bay, or some of my other Seizure Smart communities. And we realize that not everybody can get to Duluth. Mm-hmm. And so with time, as volunteers are available, we would definitely like to implement more of that in other communities.
Okay. One of my other questions was, you mentioned all about your different kinds of events coming up. Mm-hmm. Does a person have to have someone with epilepsy to be able to attend those events, or can it be just anyone?
Sometimes people just have an interest in it. Maybe they have employment that they work with individuals who are affected by epilepsy, and that's their connection. Usually people are most likely to attend if they have a friend or a family member or some kind of connection, but we're always, willing to invite people in to be involved with what we have happening in the community. Sometimes people just decide that, this is something I care about, that I want to get behind a good cause and be part of it. And so there are various reasons why someone might get involved, or even the volunteer part of it. Sometimes people will attend one of my trainings and decide, I want to get involved and help at your events as a volunteer and give back to the community. And so that's always an option too for people.
Okay, so now you were talking earlier about trying to get volunteers. Do you have a large outreach for developing those volunteers, or is it more of your training kind of advocacy aspect that you work on? How do you find those volunteers, and especially in our really further north areas, away from all the population of Duluth?
That's a great question. Finding volunteers can be challenging. We definitely want to utilize volunteers in whatever capacity best meets their needs. And so once I realize that someone is interested in being a volunteer, I usually try to find out what their interest is, what their skills are, how they would like to be plugged in. Sometimes my volunteers have helped out with facilitating support groups, helping at events, just having manpower there to help, with the check-in, helping, take pictures, making sure that everyone is well taken care of at our events. So sometimes it's people that will just want to show up once or twice. And then we have really dedicated volunteers who want to continually be involved, maybe sit at an exhibit, such as like the Senior Expo, and help share about our programs and services. I have a regional advisory committee, and it's comprised of individuals who are affected by epilepsy, some professionals in the community, and they're my sounding board. They help me with deciding which programs and services happen in our community, how we, go about promoting things, or, they'll help distribute flyers, share with their contacts about what we have going on, help me with deciding which events might be a good option in the near future. When it gets time to our fundraising walk, they're my hands and feet of making sure that everything happens, and they'll often recruit their own group of volunteers, whether it be their friends and family or coworkers, to help with the day of our walk. And so I usually have a core group of volunteers that I rely on a little more heavily throughout the year, and then I'll have, some that just really want to be involved periodically, and I respect whatever people's interest is, and then their lifestyle might change, and then all of a sudden they no longer have the time to commit to something that they used to be as committed to, and so then we eventually try to find someone else who can help fill in the gap. We're working on our volunteer program right now as an organization. We're trying to fine-tune how we take in that information and how we best reach out to those individuals and find a spot for them, and so that is something that we're currently evaluating and trying to make some adjustments to, and being efficient in meeting those individuals' needs and providing opportunities for them.
So my last question with that first bit of information that you gave out, you talked about events, support groups. Now, does these events and support groups have any kind of cost attached to them?
No, that's a great question as well. The Connect groups are free. We always provide light refreshments and beverages at the Adult and Women Connect group, and again, it includes dinner and childcare. at our support group for the families affected by epilepsy, and we really feel strongly about providing these opportunities so that people aren't isolated in their experience. For our family fun events that happen quarterly, it's always free for individuals with epilepsy, and we usually keep the cost to $5 per person for anyone else, and that is really, again, our effort to make it attainable for anyone to attend.
I'm planning on going to the Bentleyville one with my kids, so we're kind of excited about that because it's usually so cold that it's not a lot of fun for me personally because my toes freeze. So, watching the lights come on, which I've never experienced, the lights actually flipping
It will be amazing.
That sounds like a really good event.
The aquarium just remodeled a room with a bird's eye view of Bentleyville, and so we'll actually be the very first group to use that room and have that experience on opening night, and so I feel very privileged that we get to have that room on that evening. And so from 2 until 4, people will be able to explore the exhibits at the aquarium, and then we'll have dinner together in that room, and then we'll watch the lights turn on, and then people can go over to Bentleyville at their leisure. And so, again, opening night is November 21st. We're very excited about this event.
Yep.
Yeah.
And just to recap, those with epilepsy are free. Everybody else is $5.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And we always keep it free, too, for children 2 and under, just because we understand that, the little babies really aren't going to be experiencing it like the rest of the older people who are attending. And also sometimes we have people with numerous, family members where, it can become expensive for them and trying to understand their situation. And if people need us to waive the fee, there are times that we do make exceptions. If somebody would like to attend and they financially wouldn't otherwise be able to attend, they can always ask, and we'll work out it so that that they don't have to worry about the cost.
That's good to hear. So I have a question for you. It's my own personal curiosity. How'd you get involved in all this?
Great question. I lived with epilepsy for most of my life, and so people wouldn't know that by looking at me. And I think what really attracted me to this foundation is realizing how isolating it can feel when you have epilepsy and you feel alone. So I had my first seizure when I was 13 months old. It lasted for 2.5 hours, which is considered a very long seizure, and it was a miracle that I survived and that I'm okay with all my functioning. And so I started medication as an infant. My doctors were very optimistic that I would outgrow epilepsy. And so when I was 5 years old, my parents naively believed that I was seizure-free when I came off of phenobarbital and wasn't having any more convulsive seizures. The problem was that they weren't educated. They didn't realize that epilepsy doesn't always look like someone falling to the ground and convulsing. And so their perception of epilepsy wasn't accurate. When I was 5, I remember telling people that I had the chills. Lack of a better term, I didn't know I was having seizures, and what it felt like was terrifying, and I felt cold, and that was the best way that I could describe it for the rest of the world to understand that something was wrong.
You said you were 5?
Yeah, and so part of my passion for this is I get it. I understand how easy it is to be misunderstood, why epilepsy in many ways just isn't getting enough awareness as it should have at this point, given how common it is. 1 out of 10 people will have a seizure in their lifetime. 1 out of 26 people will go on to develop recurring seizures, which we call epilepsy. And that's something that we all need to be aware of, because the chances are great that it will affect someone close to you or someone you work with. So I went through my school career without anyone knowing I was having seizures until I was in high school. I first realized something wasn't right in junior high. I finally could articulate that I wasn't okay, that when this feeling would come over me, that it wasn't just cold. And I had a seizure while getting ready for school in junior high, and I knew it was different this time. When I came to awareness, I was still standing. I thought, well, that's strange, but I knew I lost track of time, and I had lost control of my bowels. And I was too embarrassed to tell anybody. So I cleaned up and I went to school that day, too terrified to tell anyone that it had happened. A couple months later, I had a seizure in the mall that resulted in me falling to the ground, but I didn't convulse. And so my dad didn't bring me to the ER that day. He was about to call 911 when I came out of the seizure. He was pretty confident it was a seizure, knowing my history. But again, he was not a doctor, and he didn't see convulsions and didn't really know for sure. By the time I had then into pediatrics, referred to neurology, referred for diagnostic testing. Everything looked normal. Because an EEG, which reads your brain activity, doesn't always show seizure activity, only if there's actually seizure activity happening in that moment, or if one has recently happened.
So it only shows a brief moment of the past,
Yeah,
or one that's going on.
Right. So what it's looking for is excessive electrical discharge, which would indicate that there's a seizure going on, either in that part of the brain or the whole brain. And so, again, they didn't see it. And so my doctor at that point said, "You don't have epilepsy." And he discredited the one that I had while I was getting ready for school, thinking that if I had a seizure that day that I would have fallen to the ground. And so I was embarrassed. I felt alone. 2 more years went by and I started having a new type of seizure, which was more obvious from the outside. So now what I had been having as simple partial seizures with just sensory-only experiences with this uncomfortable feeling, which is very common. People will report it as deja vu, feeling of intense fear and anxiety, funny smell, like a burning smell, ringing sound. That often is an aura or a precursor to a bigger seizure. So now I started progressing to complex partial seizures. During complex partial seizures, someone has a very altered sense of awareness. And so while their gross motor is intact and they might be able to speak, they won't remember what's happening and they won't be in control of what's happening in that moment. And so during this type of seizure, I might do repetitive purposeless movements, which is also really common. So picking at clothes. Someone might wring their hands, blink excessively, smack their lips. And to the outside world, they might not understand that that's a seizure. Oftentimes, people are thought to be drunk or on drugs because it's so confusing. And they are short. They usually last a few minutes. And usually there's no first aid needed. They will usually stop on their own and not escalate and won't become injured during it. But they can become dangerous. If that person's near water or something hot or sharp, they could become injured. And so we want people to know to guide them away from any hazards. But if you try to get in their space, they might flail their arms at you on accident, not trying to resist you, but that's perceived as a threat in that moment if you get in their space. So now that people could see them happening to me, I went in for another round of testing, but it was normal again. Because again, on the day that they tested me, everything looked good. So my doctor at that point suggested that I wait and come in the next time I felt funny. I had a seizure while driving on December 17th, 1996, because I didn't know I had epilepsy. And that was the next time that I felt that sensation. And so I lost awareness when I took a left from 3rd to Mesaba Avenue in Duluth, and I came to awareness with a nice man opening my car door, and I saw vehicles rushing by me in 2 directions, and I had no idea how I got where I was. My vehicle ended up perfectly balanced on a snow-covered median right before the freeway.
Scary moment.
Yeah, I mean, in that moment I realized how blessed I was. I can't even describe that moment fully. I know that I felt safe and at peace with this person by my side, and he was gone before I could thank him. My dad, an officer, and a tow truck showed up on the scene. No damage to me or the vehicle. I went in for testing, and they were able to provoke seizure after seizure after seizure. So that day, I was finally diagnosed with epilepsy. What I had to go through to be heard and understood
was an almost death experience.
Yeah, and at the time, it wasn't even on my radar to be an advocate. I didn't even know about the Epilepsy Foundation. All I knew is I now had epilepsy, and I was going to lose my driver's license, and it would be life-changing. At that point, I was working on finishing high school, and then my ambitions were to become a teacher. And so it wasn't going to stop my plans for the future. I was still going to move forward on everything I planned to do. I was determined. And so the medication worked for 2 to 3 years at a time. And so every 2 to 3 years, after another failed med, I would lose my driver's license. In 2001, I realized that it was time to think about other options. I knew I was a potential candidate for brain surgery because in 1996, they had seen all my seizures coming from the same part of my brain, which was really promising, but they don't jump to thinking about brain surgery until you have failed at least 2 to 3 meds.
Okay.
So I had just failed my second med. I was entering my last year of college, and I realized that this would probably be the best time to consider it. I was engaged to be married. My husband-to-be at the time was very supportive of me doing whatever it would take to become seizure-free if that was the path I wanted to take. And so while I was student teaching, I was preparing for testing for brain surgery, and it was a little bit mind-boggling at the time to think about what I had to gain and what I had to lose.
That's a lot.
I thought, here I am, I have my teaching degree, and I'm going to pursue an opportunity to let someone cut into my head and hopefully eliminate my seizures. It was an extensive amount of testing that I went through over that summer after I graduated before determining that I was a good candidate. And then on September 27, 2002, I had a very successful right front temporal lobectomy. I've been seizure-free for 13 years.
Wow.
It's been an amazing journey. I still didn't know about the Epilepsy Foundation. I went on with my life. I thought, good, this is behind me. I don't have this anymore. I kind of had to take a deep breath and wait to see if it really worked. The doctors told me I had to hit 2 years seizure-free. So by 2004, I was capable of coming off of my meds. I waited another year, and then 2005 came. So 2007, 2 years off of meds, I was finally breathing a sigh of relief. I finally felt like I was done with this, that I didn't have epilepsy anymore, that I wouldn't have to think about it again, and then I met Lila. In 2008, while I was teaching kindergarten in Sauk Center, Minnesota, foster grandma Lila worked in my classroom, and she looked at me one day while serving snack to my students and told me about her son Keith and how in 2004 they lost him to a seizure because unfortunately he was alone when it happened and his face pressed against the bathroom door and he couldn't breathe. And I could barely keep my composure that day because I realized that I was going to have to tell this woman that I loved that what took her son's life I had, but had been given a different opportunity, and it was really hard for me to even wrap my mind around it at that moment. Lila shared that they donate their used clothing in memory of her son. The Epilepsy Foundation in Minnesota owns and operates a used clothing distribution center, so we collect used clothing, which in turn generates some of the funding for our programs and services. And that was my first time hearing about the Epilepsy Foundation in Minnesota. And just when I thought that this was in my past, I realized that the Epilepsy Foundation in Minnesota was something I wanted to get involved with, that I wanted to be a voice for other people affected by epilepsy, and that I didn't want anyone to feel alone. And so I called the Epilepsy Foundation the next day and became a volunteer. And that's how I initially got plugged in. We did our first walk in memory of Keith with her family, and it was such a healing time, such a great experience to be part of that with her family. And then the Sauk Center Herald found out and asked if we would be willing to do a story. They ran a front page article, and that was eye-opening. That was when I realized how many people shared in our journey. I had people coming from various parts in the community sharing about their experiences, including a grandma who shared about her granddaughter who had just had the same brain surgery that I had and wanted me to meet her. And I wouldn't have had that opportunity if I would have continued to live alone in my journey. And so I honestly at that point still thought I would teach public school for the rest of my career. I went on to pursue my master's degree in reading, and I graduated with that in 2012. And I decided...
You're going to teach in a different way now.
Yes, life takes different turns. And I was very thrilled that this job became available at a time where I wasn't under a teaching contract. I'd had my third child in 2013, and I had decided to do in-home daycare for a short time while I was home with him, which meant I wasn't under a teaching contract, and it was just perfect timing to step into this role. After volunteering for 5 years, it was a very easy fit, and I knew it was time to be able to do this full-time and not just have it be part of my once-in-a-while commitment, but I wanted it to be what I do day in and day out, is advocating for people, helping them feel heard, and overcoming the barriers of epilepsy.
For those of you who are just joining our program, this is Life Goes On. Today I have Lisa Peterson with me, and she's been talking about epilepsy. We're going to move on into that. I mean, that's a very mind-boggling story you just told. It really is. It's very beautiful, too. But we're going to move on to the epilepsy part of it. Mm-hmm. CSEP is for those 55 and older. Mm-hmm. Life Goes On is dedicated to those in our Minnesota area, 55 mm-hmm. and older. So what would you say for people who maybe have been experiencing seizures, maybe who are actually diagnosed with epilepsy, especially those who are 55 and older and maybe are at a standstill in their life, they don't know what to do. What about for those that maybe perhaps have lost jobs because of this or are afraid to go find a job because of this? What would you say for those people, and what kind of help can they find?
Well, the thing that I would say to anyone affected by epilepsy is never to let it stop you from living your dreams. I think sometimes that we wrongly assume that if we have a diagnosis that in some way that it's going to limit our opportunities, and I just shared that epilepsy didn't have to stop me. Oftentimes people wrongly believe that if you have epilepsy that you have less abilities, and that's not the case at all. And so go after your dreams, never let it stop you. People sometimes are afraid of the discrimination with employment. Some of that stems from years of wrong thinking. In the not so long ago past, if someone had epilepsy, they were thought to be demon-possessed. They were thought to be a threat to society. At one time, people were institutionalized. They were even given shock treatments. They were sterilized. There were laws at one point that prohibited people who had epilepsy from being married. And so, believe me, there's validity to people's fears and their apprehension. And so sometimes people still holding on to those years of wrong thinking believe that they shouldn't talk openly about epilepsy, that you shouldn't tell your employer, that you shouldn't tell your friends or family. It's better when you tell someone because then they can respond appropriately to you and they can be a support system to you. But people are afraid that they'll lose their job or that someone will underestimate their capabilities. And so we really do encourage people to share with their employer, make sure that they understand. And if you need an accommodation, you can ask for that. Under the Americans with Disability Act, people with epilepsy are covered. And so the employer is under obligation to provide a reasonable accommodation that allows them to be successful. There are times that there might be some safety concerns about that employee and the position that they hold, so they might have to modify what their job is or even give them a different position within the company. And I've heard great stories of how that looks for some individuals, like maybe coming off of driving a truck and doing an office job might have to be the option. Yeah, and that's really unfortunate, for someone who maybe enjoys their position, but if they're in a situation where it's no longer safe, that might be the best option. So realizing with any heavy machinery or other safety concerns that employers are going to have to be very creative.
It's safety, and it's not discrimination that they're thinking about moving a person with epilepsy to one position to the other. It's safety of themselves and everyone around them.
Exactly, and I think that's something that people really do need to openly talk about to their employer. I've had individuals share with me that they've hidden their epilepsy until they physically can't anymore, when it happens at work one day and then maybe they do have an episode and their employer becomes aware of it, and then in hindsight they might realize, wow, I probably should have told my employer before, but they were afraid. I told my employers, and I was really thankful that I did. When I was in high school, I had a seizure while cashiering, and it was devastating because it was at a point when I had gone 2 years without a seizure, and I was wrapping up my senior year in high school, and I was cashiering and owed someone change, and I started rambling to him during the complex partial seizure. Remember, you don't know what you're saying or doing. So I started talking about how I needed to save money for college.
A scary moment for the both of you.
Well, yeah, and fortunately he went and found my supervisor who was familiar with epilepsy, and she knew that it was a seizure right away because she has 2 family members that have epilepsy, and I had reported to her that day that I had had a really bad migraine the day before and that I wasn't feeling quite right. So she already even was concerned about me. And I look at that and I think, wow, she responded correctly because she knew I had epilepsy, because she was familiar with seizure types, and that made a world of difference to me in that moment. Because when you come out of that seizure, you feel awful anyhow, your head hurts, you're tired, and you feel emotional, and at least to have someone supportive there by my side was so much better. She maybe would have fired me if I wouldn't have told her ahead of time, and she would have thought that I was being inappropriate, that I was not doing my job. And so as uncomfortable as it can be at times to talk openly about it, it's always better than waiting and having to be reactive rather than proactive. For seniors with epilepsy, you asked about how that might look. I think sometimes seniors who have epilepsy don't even know they have it. Their family members don't recognize it yet either, or their caregivers, because it can be so subtle. And so some of the ways that we want to help in our community is bringing awareness. So we do free training for any groups, including caregivers. It's a great opportunity for anyone in a senior serving facility to have that training. It's a 1-hour training. It includes a CEU, so it's great for anyone like nurses, social workers, teachers who need to keep up their license. So can't go wrong with that opportunity. And it's very involved. In 1 hour, you learn about the basics of the 4 types of seizures, how to recognize them, respond to them, the treatment options that are available, things that trigger seizures, various treatment options including medicine, surgery, diet, and even learning about the social and psychological effects of epilepsy and how that might impact the individuals you serve. So it's great training for first responders, anyone in law, schools. I do trainings all over for various groups. Today I'm doing a training for school personnel. When I'm on my way back to Duluth, I'll be stopping into Mount Iron, which is nice that I'm in this neck of the woods today. But I think what we really want people to know is how to look for it, how to be aware of what those seizure types look like, because it is usually family members, caregivers that are going to first realize that that person is having a seizure, and that early diagnosis really does rest on the shoulders of those who, work with them the most, because unfortunately the doctor doesn't see them as often as their parents, their friends, their whoever it is that provides care for that individual. And I think that we underestimate sometimes that our documentation matters, that it really adds up, because we think, well, who am I? I'm not a doctor. What do I know? But believe me, that documentation is very important to the doctors. Whether it's from a teacher, from a parent, from a caregiver, when they have details of what someone has seen, how often it's happening, what it looks like, what happens before it, time of day, that information is used just as much as those EEG tests, MRIs, other diagnostics. That is a huge piece of the puzzle with understanding that person's, if they do have epilepsy or not.
Anything else you want to add, especially to the employment piece? That's with the CSAP program. Like I said, don't worry about it. We're good.
Well, I think, again, with the employment piece is most individuals with epilepsy are very successful. And I think we really want to help people understand that you can showcase your abilities to your employer and tell them that, hey, I have epilepsy, but it's not going to stop me from doing my job well. Or, there might be a time where I need to rest. Or I might not be able to drive, and so I'll have to, set up a carpool or public transportation, and how that might look differently for them. And even, any adjustments at work, what they need, like maybe it's lighting, because flickering lights can trigger a seizure for some individuals. So they might request not to have fluorescent lighting with flickering bulbs, or computer screens can sometimes be hard too with the flickering. And so they might have to take breaks or do things to, minimize their risk, or even being able to eat and take their medication on time, because eating well, being rested, staying hydrated are all pieces of preventing seizures. So they might need to be a little more on top of things with managing their overall health to manage their epilepsy well and not put themselves in a greater risk of seizures. So there are things that certainly they can work through with that employer and that individual. And I think most employers are pretty accommodating, but we do recognize that that isn't always the case. I've worked with individuals who feel they've been discriminated against, and we're here to help them walk through that and become their own advocate. And if they, need to, move further into where to go from there, as far as if they feel they've really been discriminated against, we can help them learn like what steps they can take to become their own advocate and who to report to. And but most often I think that just by being proactive that we're going to eliminate those situations as much as possible.
Okay, so for the last question I have for you, for our viewers that are watching the show today, how can they get in touch with you if they are someone who might, maybe they think they have epilepsy, maybe they have been diagnosed with it, maybe they're the older seniors that are looking for jobs or caring for younger ones, or the younger ones caring for the older ones? How can they get a hold of you?
That is, I'm so glad that you asked, because I want people to know where to go to when they are in those situations, when they're trying to figure out where do I go from here. Always, you can send people to our website. It's efmn.org. And from there, you can navigate our website. You can find contact information for any of the staff with the Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota, including me. You can also find a lot of our online resources, including our downloads, like our seizure recognition and response chart. Our information about all of our programs and services is on there. We even have a DVD that you can view online, and so that's great. We use that at our trainings, and it's a great overview that you can use for training purposes. Ideally, I like to come in and do the training and use that as part of it, but sometimes in outlying areas, people might just want to at least have the video, or they've had the training and they decide they want to keep people refreshed, or they have new staff, and so they'll refer to our website. But yeah, people can always connect with us through the website. They can find our email addresses, our phone numbers. So my phone number is 218-624-1330. And so that's my work cell. I keep it with me wherever I go for travel for work, so I'm always accessible. I might not be able to answer if I'm doing a presentation, but I'll get back to individuals when they reach out and are looking for resources. They can also email me at lpeterson@efmn.org, and so that's another great way to connect. If people want to be in the loop about what we have going on, they should sign up to be on our mailing list, and that way they'll continually get updates about what we have happening in the community. Yeah, we want people to be on our mailing list who want that opportunity to keep informed.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks
I'm glad
for
you
having
came
me.
today. So. All right, just as a wrap-up, I have Lisa Peterson today with the Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota. If you have any questions, wanting to know how to volunteer, or need advocacy in your workplace, please feel free to get a hold of her. The information can be taken at the end of this. Also, I want to thank you for watching Life Goes On, brought to you by CSEP. I do have a waiting list for CSEP for those of you who are interested in more information. But I do encourage our veterans and those with disabilities to apply. Thank you. Thanks for coming.